The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
At that time, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. And his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and have no fear. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, Tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
My dear friends in Jesus Christ, there are few scholars in the world today who are well known for critiquing the different religions, critiquing Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. And in researching into what the religions have brought out, one of the salient points that is discussed or highlighted is the fact that in all these religions there is always the highest experience of enlightenment. In Christianity, the resurrection of Christ. In Buddhism, enlightenment of Buddha. In Hinduism and Islam, the heavenly experiences. It's common for all main religions, but there is a problem because in Buddhism, for the last 2,500 years, there has been no individual, monk or guru or someone who has been strong in his or her convictions in Buddhism, never attained enlightenment or never became a Buddha except Siddhartha 2,500 years ago. And also in Christianity, for 2,000 years of preaching the gospel, no one has ever had the enlightenment experience or the resurrection experience of Jesus. And so is for people who have followed Hinduism and any other religion. So the question is asked, why is it that after so many years, no one seems to make it? With all the religious practices, no one gets there, though this is the ideal. This is the final goal. This is what we are all called to experience. And then the question is, what is it that has kept that experience away from us? So this is a common question that is being raised. So in order to answer, or in order to understand the absence of enlightenment or resurrection experience, the biblical stories give us a hint or a pointer to understand what is it that made someone have God experience and what is it that takes us away from the same experience that we all are entitled to. Because if you are a Buddhist, your final goal is to be enlightened, to be reaching enlightenment or Buddha. As Christians, we are supposed to have, even if we don't attain resurrection, have some God experience within ourselves, which will come out through our day-to-day experience of life. Why? The first reading today, my dear friends, gives us one of the first men in the Bible who had a direct encounter with God. None other than Abram, the father of the people of Israel, the father of our faith. For Judaism and Christianity begins from this man, Abram. Now, when you read the biblical story, especially the book of Genesis, you find that Abraham was a man who was well settled in his own life. He had his wife and many wives, sons and children, grandchildren, his properties, his lands, his farms, and his savings. He was a man who was very well settled in his own country, in his own land. But then the challenge comes from within himself when God calls him and says, now leave everything that you have, leave all the comfort that you have gained for yourselves, leave every agricultural property that you own, leave them, and I want you to move away from everything. So then it was almost impossible for anyone, my dear friends, to leave what you have gained for an entire lifetime. Imagine one of you being asked to leave your business, leave your houses, leave everything that you have in your bank accounts. Is it possible? No. Most of us will not even go there. So Abraham was a man who had that courage within himself to let go. And letting go made him become a man who was entitled to this experience of encountering the Lord. So the first reading gives us, my dear friends, the most important step that we all have to take, even if we don't physically leave everything that we have. It's important that we have this attitude of being able to let go, having that capacity within oneself. I am willing to let go of my money. I'm willing to let go of all what I have. I can do that. That's the first qualifier, my dear friends, to have God experiences. When you take the life story of Moses, whom we find in the gospel passage today, he was a man who had the backing of the royal family. He had a comfortable life. He was accepted. He was having everything that he wanted as an individual, though he was a Jew, but living in Egypt. And he got a call, or he heard from within himself, now I want you to live your life and be the liberator of your people. Moses also had God experiences, my dear friends. We know it was suffering. Abraham had suffering because he was letting go. Moses had suffering because he was letting go. And the other person that you find in the transfiguration story today is Elijah, again another man who was willing to let go of all what he had, and he was willing to suffer for his people. So there are two very important steps or qualifiers in order to be someone who attains that experience of transcendence. Letting go, willing to suffer, and also not believing in God alone, but believing in a different set of values. Because when you let go, you have to trust in God. You have to trust in what you get and what you receive. You have to live as and when it is necessary. Do whatever you have to do, and not do what you have to not do, because dependence in God is not always easy. But God encounters were possible for people who had done that. That is why the second reading, my dear friends, taken from the letter of St. Paul to Timothy. Now, it's a different context, of course, after many centuries of experience of Moses and Abraham having God encounters. But Paul is writing to Timothy because Timothy was a young man who had become a leader of a Christian community. And there were the Greeks, there were the Egyptians, there were the believers, there were the non-believers. And it was a very difficult moment of leadership for Timothy. And Timothy had let go of everything. And he had become the leader. And there he was suffering, because when you work for people, it's always not easy. If you work for yourself, it's your family, your wife, your children, your company, your job. Not much of suffering because it's all about yourself. But when you work for human beings, whatever you do and whatever you do not do, you will always have enemies. You will always have criticism. You will always have challenges. So Paul tells Timothy, remember, in your suffering, having let go, there is the possibility of experiencing God's graces within yourself. So therefore we can see that the experience of God, or the experience of transcendence, God encounters, are for people who are willing to go through this mill of suffering. And when you come to the gospel passage today, as we journey through the season of Lent, the second Sunday is always about the transfiguration experience of Jesus. Today's gospel text is from the Gospel of Matthew. And it tells us that Jesus goes up to the mountain, which is again a comparison between Moses going to the mountain before he became the liberator of the people of Israel. Here Jesus is going up to the mountain before he became the liberator of all mankind. They go up there, and of course, they were willing to let go. Moses was willing to let go. Moses was willing to leave his own land of comfort life. Jesus is now ready to leave the comfort of being the Son of God and living his ordinary life. He knew the time is coming. So now he goes up the mountain. And also it's interesting whom he is taking there. It's Peter, James, and John. 3 men who were completely dedicated to continuing on his mission after his death and resurrection. And they became powerful figures of Christianity, and also they became powerful men of transcendence experience, because if you go to the experience of Peter had God experiences. James had, John had. Before they went through the experience of God, here they are up in the mountain. Now what the author highlights here is that, except in the Gospel of Luke says that Jesus was talking with Elijah and also with Moses. And his topic of discussion, according to Luke, was how he was to pass through his own death in Jerusalem. So here again, Jesus is now willing to let go of his life, and he's willing to suffer. And the topic of discussion was the suffering that he had to encounter in Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem. So the author says very interestingly, when Jesus was having this God encounter, his body became dazzling white. And it says his clothes became white as light. And then they saw Moses and Elijah talking to him. In the Gospel of Luke, it also gives that his whole body became a light which was terrifying for the disciples around him. Now, what does that indicate, my dear friends? This is one of the main points where we have to connect this reading with the book of Genesis, where one of the most important sayings in the Old Testament is when in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verses 26, where God says, we are created in the image and likeness of God. That means each and every one of us has something within ourselves which we cannot explain, which we cannot see and touch, but make us become so divine from within. Your body and my body is the container of that which is divine. That divine nature within ourselves is all hidden. When you have transcendental experiences, when you have God encounters, your inner being awakens. Your inner self is awakened. You know, my dear friends, even today in the world, scientifically speaking, they don't accept or they cannot accept from the theories of science the presence of a soul. But if you go to the deep dimensions of scientific explanation, we all know how our inner self has the capacity to even stay healthy when you don't have worries in your life, stress in your life. What does it mean? Because even in medical science, they say today, don't have stress. If you meet with a doctor, if you are suffering from heart conditions, they say, don't stress. Diabetes, don't stress. You have any other problem medically, don't stress. High blood pressure, don't stress. What does that all indicate? Because if you keep your inner being healthy, alive, pure, and agile, my dear friends, your body and my body will reflect that inner healing, the inner presence of what we call the soul, the inner dimension of our inner lives. So when you are a person who is willing to let go, as Moses did, as Abraham did, as Elijah did, as Jesus did, my dear friends, you let go of all the stresses in this life, and your inner soul is awakened. And also when you go through suffering, when you have been able to have the courage to let go, what is within comes stronger. That's what we call transcendental experiences. It is not only limited to those whom we call the religious men and women. It's not only for those who have what you call religious practices in life. If you read the stories of great men like Abraham Lincoln, Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, men who had nothing much to do with religion, but they were men who had that inner capacity to let go of themselves. And also they were willing to suffer for the well-being of mankind, for their country, for their people. And all of them have had deep experiences which they say, I cannot explain, but I felt that something was driving me. Abraham Lincoln says that. I know from within myself there is a power. Martin Luther King, he says, I know there is something from within me that is driving me, and I know it is powerful. I know that my power is not from myself, it's from the Creator. So therefore, my dear friends, all what these texts show us today is that transfiguration and transcendental experiences of God or God encounters are possible for all of us. It's for you and it's for me and it's for all of us. The problem is that we do not meet the conditions that is out there for us to reach such experiences. Am I willing to let go of what I have found for myself? Am I willing to surrender everything in suffering for all mankind, for the well-being of others? Am I having the courage to face them with that Creator who is driving me? Transfiguration will be, my dear friends, experience that's possible. Sometimes, with simple people, you will see how they talk about such transcendental experiences. In my life, my dear friends, as priest, I have heard people who say certain things that you can never fully explain and understand. Just some time ago, a lady who was suffering enormously from some sort of a blood cancer, and then she realized that her death was imminent. And then what she did was she started thinking of her own life. She was kind of an educated woman. She prayed that whatever that she's going to have in her life, that she was giving herself a certain period of time. The doctor said, for example, will say, she was told, you have only 1 more year to live. So she said, when I was told, I decided, I'm going to empty all my money, give everything to others, and I'm going to let go. So she started living her life from a different plane, gave up everything, willingly shared, went and met with people whom she thought needed her attention. She changed her life completely from what she was before the diagnosis. And then she said, lo and behold, when I was emptying everything, and when I was about to leave this world, comes the miracle of healing. So she says, it cannot be anyone else. It is God who wants me to live. And she continues on now, and her life is a good example, my dear friends, of what Moses went through, what Abraham went through, what Jesus went through, and what people like St. Anthony, our saint. Here are people who have had true, authentic God experiences because they all had the common capacity to give up, willing to suffer, and surrender themselves completely to the divine that is within. There comes healing, and there comes God's power and glory explained and experienced within.